Okay, so what have I got to talk about tonight? Um, Radiation. Radiation is defined as a stream of electrons passing from one area to another. Examples of radiation would be, you find radiation in everything. You can find it in stones, you can find it in copper, metals, electrical devices, anything that gives off radiation like light and heat basically is radiation. Examples of radiation here in the west of Ireland would include solar radiation. Whenever we get it, we have a few long hot days in the summertime, and if you forget to put on a shirt, and if you expose yourself to the X-ray or the UV light and the hard sun, basically what it's doing is it's radiating, it's sending electrons down onto your body, exciting the atomic structure of your cells to the point that they actually vibrate and create heat, and as a consequence of that you get sunburn. Another example of radiation in the west of Ireland is radon. The area that I'm in actually has a high concentration of radon, and radon is it comes from deep within the earth. It rises up in the form of a gas, and basically you never even notice that it's there. We have what's called a radon barrier that's put down on the foundations of your house to stop that gas from building up underneath the house. And then if that barrier wasn't there, what it would be doing is it would be funneling the gas up into your structure, and so concentrating the gas, and that would eventually cause some form of harm. Be that as it may, my grandparents lived to healthy old ages and they never suffered anything from it. Furthermore, what can I say about radiation? It's the problem with the radiation and nuclear weapons is basically they are mining things like uranium and plutonium, which are radioactive materials that are found deep inside in the earth. And what they do is they bombard that plutonium, uranium, they bombard it with even more radiation, and that causes enrichment, and it becomes very, very, very potent, very, very radioactive. And the first use of the nuclear weapons, the Manhattan Project in America, after all the testing that they had done, they realized that every time they exploded one of these weapons, they were casting out up dust and radioactive material up into our atmospheres, and that stuff tends to linger for hundreds, if not thousands of years. So fairly quickly the scientists realized that you can't be doing too much testing, because otherwise you're slowly killing future generations. And as a consequence of all the nuclear testing that was done back in the 50s and 60s, and all the different treaties about arms limitation and all that, it was not necessarily about the development of the weapons, it was about the use of the weapons. And by using those weapons, you're not only, even for test purposes, you weren't just harming your own people, you were harming the entire human race. So where do we go from there? The military. The military are charged with being responsible for a country. If a country has nuclear weapons, it's the military that are ultimately entrusted with taking care of those nuclear weapons. And yes, they know how to deploy them and how to fire them, but the big priority there is how to safeguard them, how to preserve them, prevent them from falling into the wrong hands, preventing people making stupid decisions and firing off a nuke, right? There's some very calm heads out there, and there was an example of this way back in depths of the Cold War. It was in the early 80s, and what had happened was there was a major military exercise going on in the West, in Europe and America. and Oscar Mike, I think it was called. But up in the Arctic, with absolutely no relation to that exercise whatsoever, there happened to be an Arctic expedition of scientists. And these scientists actually fired a missile up into the atmosphere for the purpose of collecting, I don't know, weather data or something like that. But that actual missile launch was caught and picked by a tracking station over in the USSR. And the guy that was in front of that radar terminal, when he spotted it, his training suggested that his next duty was to inform the officer behind him that there was a major launch, a preempted strike against the USSR, time to retaliate. That was his orders. That was his orders. And he didn't follow them. He chose not to call it as a preempted military strike. I don't know what was going through his head at the time. You can only imagine, if you're in the depths of a Cold War, the suspicion and everything, and you see something popping up on your radar screen and it's less than 20 minutes away, flight time away from Moscow, and to have the calmness of nerves to actually say, do you know what, that is not what we think it is. That is not what I'm trained to think that is. And as a consequence of that, he did not end up being put on a firing line. He didn't lose his job. In fact, he actually got one of the highest decorations you can possibly get from the Russian government. He was highly decorated for his decision. Because he basically prevented nuclear Armageddon. And that just brings up another point that I want to bring up. Way back, just after the USSR collapsed, well, it was after the USSR collapsed, Time magazine, it was a popular magazine, it's produced in America, I think it's still on the go, but a journalist found, got their hands basically on what the Russians had planned for nuclear Armageddon. What was the Russian plan for retaliation or to strike the West? And it made for very chilling reading. It was about 4 pages long, and from what I remember, I was only a teenager at the time, and to read things like that, like, maybe I shouldn't have read them because it was very traumatic. And well, at the time I thought it was very exciting and very it leveled my head a bit. So anyways, it was to start with 3 waves. Firstly, there'd be some sort of political standoff where Russia had come to a conclusion that it was going to use nuclear weapons. The first wave was going to be a preemptive strike against the West, and the targets were all the major cities of Western Europe and America. Once those missiles were fired and landed on the targets, naturally enough, the West is going to retaliate, and the major cities in Russia would also be hit. So it was agreed that what would happen was, after the first wave, there would be about a month, if not 2 months, of basically civil defense going around taking stock of what was lost, what was obliterated, realizing the hundreds of millions of people that had just been evaporated, take stock of the economic, the political, the agricultural, the industrial state of the planet Earth, basically. And after that 2 months was up, and if they were still at an unsatisfactory situation that was not agreeable by the Russians, they would unleash their second wave. And the second wave was not going to be aimed at any major urban centres. They would have been aimed at all agricultural and industrial areas around the world. Didn't matter politics, nothing. Everywhere was going to get a nuclear bomb. After the second wave, that was it. The third wave was to occur almost as soon as the second wave was fired off. The third wave was the planet killer. It was all the hydrogen bombs, all the thermonuclear, anything and everything that could fly and that was radioactive was going to get dumped on the planet. And there was absolutely no way a nuclear bomb shelter, there's no amount of stockpiling, no amount of cloning or human engineering or living in space, space colonization or any of that would have been impossible. Absolutely impossible. Even bacteria wouldn't be able to survive this. And so when we talk about nuclear Armageddon, it really, really is the very, very end of human existence. So to hear politicians of whatever country talking about firing any sort of nuclear weapon or deploying any sort of nuclear weapon, I just think, I actually laugh to myself because they are actually uneducated and foolish. Because I can guarantee you, it doesn't matter what race or creed of a soldier that you are, you're not trained to wipe out the whole human race. You're not. You're trained to safeguard your weapons. And the politicians can say whatever they fucking like. Nobody's going to press any buttons. There's also talk in Ukraine about tactical nuclear weapons, and that's ridiculous. When they talk about tactical nuclear weapons, they're talking about area denial weapons. It's basically a piece of radioactive material strapped to a grenade. Or, something as simple as that. It's not necessarily the explosion that's going to cause the damage. It's the spreading of that radioactive material over an area, or it could be an aerial burst where they just drop the bomb, it explodes, and the particles just fall over a particular area. The consequence of that is the radioactive stuff falls on the ground, it gets into the water systems, it gets onto the land, animals eat it, people walk on it, people breathe it, and over time they develop cancer and they die. And that's, again, it's complete disregard for humans, it's complete disregard for the human race, for existence of anything on this planet. So again, I think it's a waste of time, and I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't even think about it. Nobody would even contemplate that. So that's all I have to say today. Take care.